Hey Duke, thanks for joining me today for another podcast episode of the Limitless Influence podcast.
Hi, David.
Today's topic is going to be around impression management and authenticity.
Hmm.
Um, First question for you is, what is actually impression management?
What is actually impression management? Well, as you might expect, it's when you attempt to manage your impression in the eyes of other people. Uh, so, a lot of that includes a lot of mind reading, trying to figure out what the other people are perceiving, and based on your assumption of what they're perceiving, you attempt to modify your behavior so that you ostensibly are perceived a little bit in a better light. Is that a good working definition for you?
Yeah, I would say in a better light, more than in a better light, the way you would like to be perceived, ideally. So sometimes it's not necessarily in the best light possible, but just the way you think it would be great for your ego to be perceived. I'll make that small distinction here. Um, but yeah, absolutely. And what is being authentic then? We're
Uh,
comparing it to.
yeah, man, they throw that word out in our industry. It's like the marketing buzz. It's like be authentic, be authentic. It's literally just the same thing as be yourself, be yourself. Uh,
Yes.
authenticity is really, I think the correct way to define it in a working way is closer to congruence than it is against some sort of weird magical version of your ideal. So your ego would put this ideal forward, and this is how I want to be perceived. And then if you try to match that, then uh, a lot of the less Hawkinsian, like less psych people in the industry will assume that authenticity is really being your true self and stepping into your all of your power. But I actually think authenticity as a working word is closer to congruence than anything. And congruence, from the old definition, is alignment in your thoughts, words, and actions.
I really like that definition because that's more achievable. Authenticity, defined as being your true self, supposes that there's only one true self,
Right.
which even actually from psychology is probably not true. There is more evidence that shows that we have multiple personalities and we can embody most of them, uh, even simultaneously. So it's really hard to even think about being authentic. So we are comparing an attempt to influence people's impression of us versus the ideal concept of being constantly aligned with a certain version of ourselves that we choose. Is that how we would like address this topic here, this comparison?
I think authenticity touches more on your thoughts, your words, and actions are all aligned with each other. I don't think it's really against a ego projection or a ideal or one specific type of thing. It's really in the moment, in whatever state of mind you're in, how you feel, how you speak, and how you act all line up with each other, and there's no weird incongruent things poking out. And so you can be fully authentic, quote unquote. And I'm just gonna keep. I hate the word authentic. It's so weird and overused. So I'm gonna use congruence as I continue to talk. When you're being congruent, you could be in a bad mood. You could be depressed. You could have had a lot of stress going on in the day and be sort of aggro and stressed out. And if you act in alignment with the way that you feel, with the way that you speak, and the way that you're thinking, then people are going to still trust you where you come from, right? That's the whole point of congruence, is so that you're not showing these little things that make people second guess whether your intentions are true or pure or aligned. But a lot of people, when they deal with the state management part of it and be like, well, I'm authentically depressed, so I'm just going to go out and be a depressed asshole.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They ignore their own power and their ability to emotionally self-regulate and manage their own state. And if they choose to play victim to their own emotions, then there's no amount of authenticity that's going to save you from yourself.
Yeah, I think authenticity, at least in the way I see it, would be more about owning who you are. So, for example, when people are in their head, usually they are over focused and worried about multiple things. They're extremely anxious, and therefore they speak from the thoughts that they have instead of, let's say, from the emotion, the values that they have, the beliefs that they have. And there is this lack of incongruence that happens there because you kind of you have a hard time to think or to perceive like that there is a real person behind this. I think the word real that we like to use often is kind of important here. Uh, Many times when you would see, let's say, guys talk to girls and be very anxious about it, they don't they don't show up authentically, or they're not perceived authentic by the girls. That's like when we do the model work on workshops. That's one of the first things that girls would say among the let's say the top three answers to what do you like to see in a guy. The first is confidence, the second is charisma, and the third is authentic. That being said, many times the guys are like, yeah, but I just told her exactly what I wanted to say, and she didn't perceive me as authentic. And the reason is because the guy is like in his head. He's very disconnected from his feelings, and we don't really feel that there's like an entire, I almost want to say a belief system and a value system behind what is said. So you were talking about the guy that is depressed and that like acts congruently with his depression. He might still not be perceived as authentic because people can see that there's something behind that. And that's actually something that most of the time when people can see through the impression management, uh, they really notice that. They see, okay, the person I'm seeing right now is probably not the person that I will reliably see on a daily basis in most of other situations. So what I think we're discussing here is there a way to manage your impression, but at the same time be congruent with who you are most of the time? In other words, is it possible to impression manage congruently all the time or most of the time?
Well, I think that impression management, as we have it at its nomenclature, like it's kind of a intensely fake thing. It's like something that can't be achieved. But I think that the way to do impression management is really two things: knowledge of self and state management, right? Like it's hard to show the world who you are when you're not sure who you are, right? If you haven't made decisive value systems level stuff that says, this is who I am, these are the lines that I won't cross, these are, if you don't have those rules attached to you and you're just sort of floating through the world, asking the world to tell you your value, asking the world to tell you who you are, then it's very difficult to manage impression to show people who you are because you have nothing to send out, right? There's nothing solid
Yes.
there. And then the other thing is being intensely aware of your state management in the moment and being able to change it. And paradoxically, proper state management is really a focus outward. Like your first step into getting out of your head is getting into your body, but then your next step is getting into the environment, right? And that allows you to actually microcalibrate to what's going on because you are moving fluidly in the world as a whole, interacting with it, right? It's like the third level of state management. Like you're not just like, okay, I don't want to be sad, I don't want to be sad, I don't want to be sad. That's all in your head, right? But if you get into your body, you start feeling the energies and you let them dissipate, then you're doing that, right? But you still can't relate with the outside world if you're only feeling yourself in your body. You have to be able to manage those feelings into the environment around you in order to
That's
to do that. So as far as impression management is concerned, I don't think you can do it through some sort of affirmation technique or whatever, but I think you can effectively accomplish what you're trying to accomplish there by becoming more integrated with your environment and your self-knowledge. And I think that's really philosophical and nerdy, but that's my answer to it.
what I got from what you said is self-awareness that really stood out as the most important concept. Because as long as you're self-aware, you will be able to put out or communicate something that is congruent with some part of you.
Yeah. For
right? So
sure.
self-awareness is a big key. In order to have self-awareness, there's multiple things that we can get into, but most importantly, you have to know yourself really well. Most people don't, right? Like you have to know what are the underlying mechanisms that run you, and if you're aware of them, like then you can just say, okay, like I'm run by this mechanism. I'm actually, in it. State management was the second word that you mentioned. I really think what you said is kind of key with the outward focused. Let's say going out of your head into your body, then into the environment and into the other person. That's super important because that's something that is really generally, from my experience, that's something that most spiritual teachings really miss. They are all like, okay, get connecting with yourself, and then you're just with yourself, and you're kind of alone and separated from everyone else, versus
Yeah.
seeking the entire point of spirituality, which is oneness,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a big
So these
gap
are
for sure.
there's a gap. Yes.
Like it's like we were all one, and I'm only attached to this world through my, golden bracelet and my motorcycle. I, I, there's this big gap in the spiritual teachings that are like, okay, lose all attachment to ego, and then achieve nirvana. There's no like exist in this world as you walk through life and include all the other humans in it. Like there's none of that's there. That's like what we're supposed to be doing, and the religions don't support us through that. Like it's that I haven't actually found any sort of spiritual teaching that allows us to do that. One of my favorite philosophies are in Buddhism, and they're horribly silent on that whole thing. It's more about transcending the ego and self, and then moving towards oneness. But like, what if I want to, get laid or make money? No, well, eh. We can't apply that here.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so now we kind of put. I think I hope the listeners now are aware of let's say, the differences between impression management, authenticity. We brought up concepts like self-awareness, being real, congruence. Uh, let's talk about the social chameleons then, the people that really self-impress all the time, and almost that's going to speak from my experience, almost define themselves as how they are perceived by others. So their impression management literally becomes who they are. Um, what are the goals of these people? Like what would be the advantage or the outcomes of people that try to be social chameleons? I see like three big buckets in my own personal experience. One will go with some form of like acceptance or safety, like being kind of like others want you to like just blend in, like not be the 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 person that will be rejected or that will be excluded from a group. The second would be
Like a people
influence.
pleaser?
Yeah, kind of like a people pleaser, but essentially just, most kids are at some point in their life bullied. And in order to not be bullied, they kind of adapt to fit in whatever is not going to get them bullied. The bully is usually someone that stands out in a way where he's perceived a little bit as weaker. That's why he's bullied. If he was
Oh,
just like everyone else, do you see what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want to be the guy at the back of the herd. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you want to be part of, right? But you also don't want to be part of in a way that is like weird or extravagant. So many people that have some, and this is actually very present with kids that have ADHD or some form of uh, HPI, so high potential in intelligence. They have something usually that is like a little bit different and stands out, and they are good at understanding that if they don't adapt quickly to others, and kind of hide many things that are theirs, then they will not be accepted. So they impression manage quite a lot, and they do that almost as a habit. And
Yeah,
the second thing is influence. So being heard or being able to change others' behaviors effectively. And I think that's that one. I don't think you can ever not impression manage. You can still be real and authentic, but you still have to impression manage because there is an attempt to meet the person in his view of the world. And in order to do that, you have to change something about yourself. There is no other way. And the third thing is really in the professional settings to like show a version of you that would be like, let's say, more professional versus more personal. It's like the roles that you play in different setups. So there's like safety, there is influence, and there is different roles that you might play in your life
sure.
or that you would like to play. Uh, what are the things you see, or how would you react to that?
Well, I mean, social adaptability is obviously a very human, like we all have superpowers at that, right? Um, social mask theory goes into this in crazy depth. From the 70s, they did this whole thing on how we always wear masks depending on our environment. And like I'm not the same person on this podcast as I am when my grandmother invites me to her church and introduces me to all of her old lady friends, right? I'm a very different human, in both of those places. I'm the same me. I'm still being authentic. I'm still being congruent. But like you're talking about in the professional environment, I'm going to communicate in a way that allows me to connect to the hierarchy of that environment. When I was a manager in corporate America for, massive software development teams, I had a lot of authority, and I would flex that power that was given to me very well, but I couldn't have maintained it without, having a real human connected side to me. Right. In the same way, like when my mom's around, I act different than, when you and I are hanging out at 3 a.m. after a workshop, eating things that we shouldn't. So I think that's an essential human skill, and some of us are better at it than others. Um, I like what you call the influence uh, role or modality of social chameleonizing. I think there's definitely a part of life that requires showmanship or a performance art, right? Dating and pickup is like that. Standing on stage is like that. Doing improv comedy is like that. Like there's a lot of places where that is a perfectly usable thing, and it's actually probably preferable to put on a show, right? But the way that you put on a show, uh, the audience has to understand that they have to suspend their disbelief, right? Go see an action movie and Bruce Willis jumps out of a helicopter and then like tucks and rolls on a nearby roof without breaking his arms. You got to kind of suspend your disbelief, to be able to enjoy that movie as if it was some sort of reality. But we all kind of know that it's fantasy. And when I'm on stage, I'm like, gentlemen, what are you guys doing to fix your lives right now? Right? And I'm doing this whole thing. They understand that I'm a stage speaker presenter, and they fall
Yes,
into that frame, and there's nothing incongruent about it, right? There's
because they understand that the way you say it there is going to be beneficial for them. Like there is no,
right.
it's very clear, it's transparent, right? So it's kind of a transparent acting. There is like everybody understands that you're not trying to pretend you're this person. Everybody understands that you're embodying a new role in order to be more effective or
Exactly.
communicate in a more effective way. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of parts of life that are performance art, and then that's where the skill comes, right? You can craft your presence on stage. You can craft your presence in, approaching a woman. You can craft this stuff and start to kind of like Bruce Lee says, you keep the techniques that work and you let the other ones flow out, right? Like,
Yes.
you can still build a persona or a self, or like an impressioned, I guess what you're trying to manage is how your persona comes across to other people, right? That is still congruent with who you are, your inner core beliefs, thoughts, and values, right? And I can step into a role being a good grandson when she's real proud of me, introducing me to all of her friends. And I can also step into the role of manager. I can also step into the role of boyfriend, right? And they all require different things from me. However, there's also a way to fake all of those things and not be trustworthy because you're not coming from your internal value system, because you're not congruent with your self concept, or you don't have enough knowledge of yourself to understand what that is.
So that's interesting. Let's talk more about that incongruence. You said two different things. Either you're not aware of yourself to know what yourself is. That's really fucking hard. So I'm really interested to see how we're all going to discuss that. And the second was that you're somehow kind of incongruent. Did I get it right that you're kind of incongruent with your? No. Did you say one or two things? I got the incongruence with the self concept, and then there was something you said before, which was incongruent with, I guess, was your values? No, or they're
Yeah.
supposed to be the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like if you don't know what your values are, so a lot of like the codependency, the people pleasing, people who consider themselves empaths, like being able to
Yes.
feel other people's stuff, it's it's really hypervigilance, right?
Yes.
From childhood. You can pick up on things from other people very quickly because you're constantly trying to keep your environment safe. There's a lot of threats because your caretakers didn't respond in the way you needed them to when you were a kid or whatever. So um when you spend your whole life hypervigilant, being an empath, being codependent, being a people pleaser, trying to make sure everything's cool around you, it's very difficult to have identified and maintained your own self concept or
Image
your
or
your set of
concept.
values, right? Because you're constantly pinging off of everybody else to figure out what you should be doing. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come from the internal, right? Your inner child who had all these beautiful explorative and desires and things that they wanted to follow got kind of squished down by the caretakers or the environment around them or through abuse or whatever, and then you can't access that part because you were convinced that that part was wrong and you had to do something else, right? There are a lot of like narcissistic abusive relationships that even in adulthood, like it doesn't even take the inner child. Like you can be in a relationship with a woman, she could beat you down so hard that your next relationships, you're constantly second guessing your own leadership and you're just now pinging off the next girl to figure out what she wants and needs and whether you can meet them, you know? So it's not just childhood trauma, it's just trauma and
Yes.
that creates this thing. And so as far as not being able to not being able to project from your own internal value system, a lot of it has to do with you not even knowing what that is. You're constantly looking outward to be like, well, what should I say in this situation so that I can be most accepted? Uh what conversation topics should I text? How many times should I? Right? All those questions are like, what is the world going to accept from me? And that way I can fit into the rule set. When it's very difficult to be congruent or authentic to a value system that's constantly changing off of your environment. Your value system
Yes.
should always be changing and being built and growing, right? But it should be relatively stable in you, right? Like I learn new things every day and add to my value system and make new distinctions and stuff, right? Like it should always be flowing and fluid, of course. But like I definitely don't ping off of other people to figure out what I should be feeling. like
Yeah, I resonate with that for a long. So I always loved to imitate. That was kind of one thing that I was doing naturally. I think I loved it, and as a result, I was kind of always in this position of like, oh, I would like to be like this guy. Let me do like this guy, and for that, I would like quickly embody the values of this guy, and it emotions, states, all that stuff. And it made sense and it was very effective. But then following that path, I realized, oh, but I don't know, I no longer want to be this guy. I want to be like rather this guy. And for people that would be around me, that would be extremely confusing because that would mean that I would, every few months, I would almost like change my entire personality just to fit someone else. And I think that's very important because that's part of the discovery process. You mentioned self-awareness. That gave me a lot of self-awareness, like going onto different paths and trying to have like multiple goals and achieving them. And like I think it all comes down to achieving your goals and realizing what in them really fulfills you or not, just so that you understand what in them you want to keep. And then if you achieve enough goals, you'll find like common threads. For example, for me, learning is a value that is massively important
yeah.
because every time I do something, learning is one of the things that gets me there, that drives me really at the core, that really fits my core personality, and that I really want to keep. That being said, there is other things like I don't know what. Let me take something that I have used before, what people have and I don't have. Well, safety essentially. I realized that it's something that in multiple goals I was trying to achieve, but every time I would get it, I would be very like I don't know. I would not feel that it's something that fulfills me in any way. So at some point, I decided, okay, there are parts of me that really want safety for sure, but that's not really aligned with the how I want to be known and how I want to be known versus I would almost say it as how I want to be known to myself. I think that's where this concept of like how you can approach authenticity is not how I want to be known to the world or to others or how I want them to see me, but how do I want to be known to myself? I think people that speak from that perspective, from that frame, will more or less, I mean, most of the time be perceived as hyper relatable, or you use a word that I really like, which is um, not relatable, but gosh, I have a blank.
That's relatable.
Yeah. um, Whatever. Basically, people will think that okay, this person is real. That's what they will think in their head. Um, that's small distinction. How do I want to be known to myself versus how do I want to be known to other people? What do you think of that?
I agree, and I think that if you the closer you come, so your kind of self ideal, your how do I want to be known to myself idea,
Mhm.
um, early on, uh, the ego tries to protect you from change, right? So when you start attacking change, even through modeling, like you were talking about, taking on the emotions and the thoughts and the mindsets of the people around you in order to succeed at a goal, Tony Robbins always says, it's not the goal, it's who you have to become to achieve it, right? And
Yes.
those discovery processes happen all through our lives. Every time we take on a new goal that stretches us beyond what we're currently capable of, we have to sort of embody the traits and model the people around us. This, success leaves clues, right? In order to do that. But when you come out of the discovery phase and you go into implementation, like you are going to act on the things that are close to your core values. And whether you added on and changed them through your discovery phase is fine. The problem is that many people stay in the discovery phase and never commit
Way too long.
to a I think it's cyclical. Like I have discovery phases every 2 years ish where I go and I try to expand, and then come back down, execute, right? But you don't want to stay in the discovery phase forever, because it's like walking around an amusement park trying to figure out which the best ride to ride for 12 hours, and then the amusement park closes. Like, you come to the end of your life and then you never rode any rides because you couldn't make a fucking decision, right? So like, I think it's healthy to go out and expand your inner value system or whatever. But you do have to make a decision and be something for a while, and bang that up against the real world, like go and sometimes the real world teaches you, for sure. Like your ego comes up with all these ideas. You do not believe how many, maybe you would because you are a coach, but how many 55-plus-year-old guys who hire me and they want to bang 25-year-old girls. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, this is possible. It is also possible to be a multimillionaire, but the percentage chance of getting there is in a different zone than you're thinking. Like, there's no magic phrase that's going to make your old wrinkly ass attractive to a 25-year-old woman. However, we can work on these things and these things and these things, and then they're able to meet the loves of their lives and realize that they didn't want to hang out with 25-year-old girls anyway. But yeah, my point is, the world will sometimes reset your dumb ideas, and then you got to go back to the drawing board and put your values in place, right?
That's an interesting example. So when you have the 55-year-old that shows up, I imagine that when he goes talk to the 25-year-old girl and he hasn't realized that's not really what he wants yet, he is gonna act completely different when he's talking to you. He's gonna try to look cool. He's gonna try to look a certain way, right? And most of the time that will be like an ick, like, oh, like he is not grown. Something is wrong with this guy.
Right.
Does it also exist that some guys just like kind of naturally just stay as they are, quote to quote, and at least they have like solid connections?
Yes. So there's a bunch of older guys that, if I just get them to be congruent, they have conversations with all sorts of people. And usually the Insta dates that they go on, they'll go on little dates with 25-year-old girls and have full blown conversations and everything, but they're not about to like pull, right? These are the same guys who like skip the night game section because they're too old for the club. Like they don't want to come out, right?
Yes.
So like very often they'll end up pulling a date with a 35-year-old and really basking in their femininity and like, oh, okay, once they kind of let go of the impression that they're trying to give out and be like, all right, I'm going to go show what I think my best qualities are as far as values and integrity and my ability to lead. And then they go out and they, with 25, 35, 45-year-old girls in the mall and in the whatever. And then they end up being congruent with and being happy with the way that they're presenting themselves.
Strategically speaking, to wrap this up, what should a listener do after listening to this podcast? Like, what are some practical things that need to be taken away? Or
I think this podcast was
let's
a
say
massive
first steps?
glossary. This is the one that we're
Yeah,
going to point back to in other podcasts. If you didn't hear our expansive definition on what authenticity is, go and listen to episode 4. Like that's basically what this podcast is. As far as what to
agreed.
do is, obviously the answer that we touched on in this massive topic is I had this whole thing I was going to go off on about long-term, short-term social strategies, and that's just going to have to be for a different thing. Is to figure out a little bit of self-awareness, right? Like what do you want? What do you want to, what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? You know, 1 year into the future, who do you want to be and what are you doing to move in that direction? What are you proud of? You know, all these things that create your inner value system. Like we both have the self-mastery program. The first part of it is all digging in and figuring that out. And then I have one called Dating with Confidence on whatchamacallit. What do you call it? Udemy.
Yeah,
That goes through and figures out your dating values and stuff. Like this kind of stuff is all over the internet. Like figure out what your value systems are. Oh, John DeMartini has a massively badass book called the Values Factor. It goes super, it's like a 600-page book, and it goes super deep into your own personal core values in every area of life. And most people don't have the patience to get through, and
patience to go through.
anybody I've recommended it to. But anyway, this stuff's all over the internet. Like you've made one, I've made one, every self-help guy ever has made, you know, figure out who you are, self-awareness type program. Go through one of those and figure out who you are. You know, a good pop psych one is called Dr. Phil wrote it. It's called Self Matters.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's like fully pop psych, like
Great.
you'd imagine like, oh, Dr. Phil wrote this, right? Because he did. But the questions that it asks in the first few chapters of the book are just like, if you've never asked yourself those questions before, you will have a mind-blowingly large understanding. I think I read it in like 2002 or something, and it changed my whole trajectory on self-development because it moved me from being like, what do I want to become so everybody will like me, to what do I want to become because it'll help me like myself. Right? Like
Yes,
it
yes.
shifted everything. So anyway,
Yeah,
my advice is to go
you
through
know,
one of these things, figure out who you are.
yeah, all that what you said, that helps to increase one thing first, and that's kind of my theory. I haven't tested that, so I didn't talk about that yet. But I think in order to be fully real, congruent, authentic, all that stuff, you need to have some form of a high enough self-esteem. I don't know what's the threshold, and all what you said right now is going to enhance the self-esteem. Go and crush goals and discover yourself and all that stuff. Essentially, is going to increase your level of self-esteem. Is essentially compares with two things: self-worth, meaning how you value yourself, what kind of values you place on yourself. Many people think, oh, I have so much potential. If only I had this opportunity. They think they have a lot of value or worth, but then the way they speak to themselves, talk to themselves, judge themselves is horrible. Like if they were their own friend, they would be like, they would probably kick themselves out. They would not like to be with themselves as friends. So the second part of self-esteem um, is the self-image, how you relate to that kind of. If you were constantly walking with a mirror in front of you and headphones that relate what you're saying, like how would you process all these things and how you'd reply to that? Um, I think you need to have a healthy level of both of these things to be able to actually define something or someone that you would be comfortable being in the real world. without having to rely on other things. Because every time, if you have a shitty self-esteem and your self-talk is not just massively critical, but also hyper downgrading yourself all the time, I don't think you can really show up being fully authentic. But maybe we'll keep that for another episode.
Yeah, I think next episode we should talk about just self-esteem in general. We should just, in the first 25 episodes of this thing, we should just blow out all the concepts and definitions that we need to do, and then we could build on that foundation later on.
Yeah, agreed. Like I would always go back to, again, pointing to next thing, something like that's called the logical levels in NLP concept that I discovered when I did my NLP certification.
Oh yeah,
that really puts like a fantastic frame on everything that we're talking about right now. And I'm pretty sure we can point to that for resource values, and it's in our programs anyways. So, you can also join the school group and check out our courses in there, free. And probably there are some offers that are going to come, but most of this group is to help you connect with other people like you that are on this trajectory to improve their way of showing up in the world, communicating, building a great persona or the way they want to be perceived, and essentially connect with people in a real way and influence others. So it was great to talk to you today, Duke. Do you have something to add to wrap this episode?
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the videos from the Udemy course on developing your value system for dating. I'm going to stick them in one of the school group things. So anybody who joins up, then they can go get access to that. It's an hour and a half long, and you just go through and answer a bunch of questions and self-reflect. So I'll throw that in there in case anybody wants to go through it without paying the whatever $9.99 it is for Udemy. So yeah, if you go over there, join the school group, the link's in the show notes. I will put that up there in the next 24 hours or so. See you tomorrow,
Fantastic.
David.
Thanks a lot. See you tomorrow.